Welcome to Paranormal M, your gateway to the strange and unexplained. Subscribe and enable notifications to never miss out on our haunting episodes. Get ready for a chilling experience you won't forget. I found a hidden memory. Well, this story goes way back. That was when I was a kid. I don't know how I could ever forget, but I did, and now I remember. When I was a kid, my family and I used to go to this church inside of an old building. It's a Christian born-again church, so it's just a room inside of a building. This building is super weird. The interior doesn't make sense sometimes. It has offices that nobody goes in, apartment rooms that are very hidden, rooms that are just plain empty. One night there was a Christmas party. I think the whole building. We're the only one in there since it's a Sunday night. Me and my cousins decided to roam around the building. We visited every corner of this place. We stumbled upon this room behind a wall. It doesn't have anything inside of it, just an empty room. My cousin said that there's a room adjacent to it, and we could take a look if it's open. We head to that room, and it has a door with a window in it. We took a chair and we peek inside. My cousin froze for a bit and then said that there was no hole and it has an office chair. It has these manager tables inside of it. He froze again and then came down with a very disturbed face. Me and my cousins go back to the hole, very curious on what's in it. Then I took a peek inside of it. There's a naked shaped person inside it. It was facing the wall with its hand on its face. I still fucking remember the feeling as I'm writing it now. I was so scared that I couldn't look away. Luckily, one of my cousins got pissed off that I was looking too long and pushed me aside. I was stunned like my other cousin. He looked at me and said that we should never tell this to anyone. Me and him talked a bit about what we saw. Same man, naked, but he saw the face. Pale, like gray with the eye bags that made it look like he has no eyes. Apparently it didn't look at him, but just sitting on the chair with no reaction. My other cousins didn't saw anything but us. Whenever we see that room after that night, we feel like someone is looking at us. I reached out to him about this. That was last week. He got mad at me. He's trying to forget its face for a long time, and now he remembers it as well. How could we forget about it? We're chill now, and we did tell our cousins. Apparently they knew that we both knew something and just didn't say anything. They said her face looked like shell-shocked, gone pale from seeing it. I would like to return to that building as I heard that it's still there. The church as well. I'd like to see it again if the room is, in fact, still there. My boyfriend saw his brother standing on the stairs when his brother was actually in his room. My boyfriend Alex and I went to visit his brother. His brother's name is Brian. That was during one weekend. Every time we stay with Brian, he shares a new paranormal story about strange sounds or unexplained movements in his house. Alex and I are usually pretty skeptical, but we do humor Brian and let him tell his tales. However, this time, Alex was the one who experienced something odd. We went out to pick up dinner, leaving Brian at home. It was dark outside and the inside of the house was fully lit with all of the curtains open. This allowed pretty much a clear view of the inside of the house from the streets. When Alex and I returned and parked the car in the driveway, through the large window of the house, Alex saw his brother inside, motionless, just standing at the bottom of the staircase that leads to the second floor. Alex was confused as to why Brian was standing on the staircase. By the time we went inside, Brian was no longer on the stairs. We called out to him and he answered from upstairs in his room. We asked Brian what he was doing at the bottom of the stairs just a moment ago. Brian then answered that he was in his room the whole time that we were out. So who was the figure that Alex saw? Fortunately, I was focused on parking the car that I didn't see the figure myself. Anybody else have experienced something similar? Something evil lurked in my childhood house for 6 years. The horrifying events that drove us out. When I was a kid, we lived in a small, isolated house on the edge of a half-developed neighborhood. There were only about 6 houses on our block. Ours was the last one before many overgrown weeds and empty land stretched out into the dark. At night, the area was deserted. You'd rarely see anybody stepping outside. I lived there from the ages of 7 to 13, and looking back, it felt like I was trapped inside one of those disturbing, uncanny horror films where reality always seems just a little bit off. Before I dive into the incidents, it's worth mentioning that our life in that house was filled with a sense of suffocating dread. Financially, we struggled a lot during those years, drowning in debt. Strangely enough, things turned out for us as soon as we moved out. Everything turned around. Family fights erupted daily. I remember feeling terrified constantly. I remember not going too far into any rooms so that if anything jumped out, I could run through the door easily. I don't know why I did that, to be honest. Here are some of the events that made me believe that something was haunting us. Incident 1. The Unseen Watcher. I remember staying home from school one day because I was sick. I was curled up on the couch watching Barney and Friends, trying to distract myself from the eerie feeling of the house. At some point, I felt somebody standing beside me. I assumed it was my mom joining me to watch the show. I didn't think much of it. A few minutes passed, and I casually asked her something. There was no response. I asked her one more time, and there was no response again. I turned to find no one there. That's when it hit me. My mom wasn't even home. She had left for work hours ago, and I was completely alone in the house. This freaked me out, and I opened the front door, sat on the porch until my parents came home, because it just was feeling too real. It felt like somebody was actually there. Incident number 2. The Yellow Ball and the Swarm. This incident happened to my sister, but I'll explain it in my point of view. We all used to sleep in the same room since our house only had one bedroom. Me and my sister would sleep in between my parents' bed to sort of feel safe. One night my sister was studying for a test, and I was in the living room when it was around 12:30 a.m. I was starting to fall asleep when suddenly my sister bust through the door running and jumped onto the bed scared. They were crying. After calming her down, she told us what had happened. She was in the living room studying for a test when out of nowhere, a yellow ball with a smiley face on it rolled to the hallway from the other room as it came to a stop. Then dozens of cockroaches scurried out from the same room, like they do when you hear humans walking. Our house had a pretty serious cockroach problem. The floors practically came alive with them at night. Terrifying. She said that a heavy sense of dread washed over her as she just stared into this dark hallway. Then she saw it, a shadowy figure emerging from the darkness, moving in a way that made her feel cold all over. She told us that she felt stuck for a second and frozen in fear basically before running to the bedroom. Incident number 3. The Disappearing Glasses. One morning my dad couldn't find his glasses. He had recently undergone cataract surgery, so they were essential. The whole family spent what felt like hours scouring every inch of the house. We checked his shelf multiple times, which was where he usually kept them. They were nowhere to be found. We left for school defeated, convinced that the glasses were gone for good. But later that evening, as we were sitting around, my dad suddenly called out to my mom, sounding almost angry. We rushed over to find the glasses sitting right there on the shelf, exactly where we had checked over and over again. My dad thought we were playing a prank on him. We weren't. There was no explanation for how they could have reappeared like that. It wasn't him pranking us either. He was so mad that day. Incident 4. The Mysterious Fortune Teller. So this one is actually scary, so strap in. How would you feel if a random creepy-looking guy stood in front of your house and started chanting? Well, in South Indian culture, there's a figure known as Kudu Gudupu Karan. I've not heard much about them, but they're like devotees of God who roam the streets and randomly tell fortunes to people. But most people do avoid him, fearing that his predictions might bring misfortune. My encounter with one of them was when I was very young. I remember hearing a man singing some kind of religious song near a doorstep, like literally a few meters away from the door. I went to check on it, but my mom quickly grabbed me from the back and told me to be silent, not to make any sound. We pretended like there was no one home and eventually went away. I was so confused and asked my mom who he was. She didn't explain and just brushed it off. Years later, as the strange happenings in our house grew more intense, a similar figure began appearing near our house. That was while my dad was home alone. For several days, this man stood near our door, chanting and seemingly delivering cryptic messages at night. And finally, my dad confronted him, telling him to stay away. I never saw the man again after that. I couldn't shake the feeling that his presence was somehow connected to the disturbances. Incident number 5. The Chanting Yogi. My sister also had a recurring nightmare while living there. She remembers one in particular that terrified her. She would wake up to a vivid vision of a figure, like a yogi or a mystic, sitting on her chest chanting in an unknown language. She could feel his weight pressing down on her, making it almost impossible to breathe. This vision plagued her until we left that house for good. We finally moved out of that place, and to our relief, the strange experiences almost entirely stopped. Our financial situation improved, the family conflicts became less frequent, and that constant creeping fear seemed to lift. Can't explain what was happening in that house, but living there always felt like I was stuck in a disturbing horror film, one that I desperately wanted to escape. My apartment door opens by itself. Voices call my name. Strange photos appear. Is my apartment haunted? Lately I've been having some strange happenings in my home, beginning to think that there might be ghost activity. For the last few nights I've been waking up in the middle of the night with my heart beating fast and a strong feeling of being scared, as if somebody's watching me. It's an unusual sensation that stays with me for some time before I can relax enough to drift back to sleep. I've never had issues like this before. The strangest thing happened yesterday. I shut the back door to my apartment before going to bed. I'm sure I always check all the locks before sleeping. When I woke up, the back door was open. The room was cold. The temperature is extremely cold, akin to the sensation of opening a freezer. I immediately closed the door, but the whole thing was confusing to me. When I shared the news with my parents, they weren't surprised. They've noticed the door opening by itself when it was supposed to be locked. And just to clarify, in case anybody's thinking, it could have just been a gust of wind. My lock is an Aldrop. Look it up. Aldrop. There's absolutely no way a breeze could have opened it. It's literally designed to stay secure. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's also this strange thing that happened when I first moved in. I was on a call with a friend while gaming. Out of nowhere, he asked me, "Why does he keep calling your name? Go check on him." I was confused because nobody else was in the house with me. So I asked him what he meant. He insisted that he heard an old man calling my name. He thought it was my grandpa, but here's the thing. There's no one else in the apartment and my grandpa doesn't live with me. The whole situation scared me. It got worse when I heard my name being called when I was at home alone. It's often quiet, as if it's coming from somewhere else. But when I go to see, there's always no one there. The street dogs near my apartment are behaving oddly. They howl like crazy almost every night. I've lived with street dogs before. They usually don't behave this way. The non-stop loud barking and yowling that lasts for hours often begins late at night. Once my dad tried to scare off the noisy animals by throwing rocks, but it didn't work very well. Then there's the strangest thing of all. One night I was on the top floor of my apartment building, which has an open roof. Just hanging out, talking to the same friend who heard the voice. I was taking pictures of the sky, trying to capture the stars. After I went back inside, I looked through the photos and found one that I definitely didn't take. The image wasn't of the sky or of the stars at all. Instead, it was full of strange lights and colorful orbs, like something out of a ghost hunting show. I have no idea how the photo got there. It really freaked me out. Devil takes on goat appearances. I'm from a not wealthy, you could say, third world country. It's not as bad as it seems, but not as developed as it should be. Several times a year I visited my grandparents in the countryside. They had several cows, sheep, chickens, etc. Regular stuff. My uncle, who's 6 years older than me, used to work as a shepherd. He was about 13 back then. So he invited me to look after sheep with him. I took this opportunity as an adventure. Imagine a green place surrounded by mountains and beautiful scenery. It was almost nighttime and we put the sheep in circle fencing, made a bonfire, prepared to eat bread, jerky, meat, and yogurt. We started talking. You know when you're young in open space at night, you talk about scary stuff. Suddenly, another shepherd who was an elderly person joined us out of nowhere. We didn't mind, especially after finding out that he had sausages and many other delicious things. So, surrounded by a bonfire and fresh air with the stars as visible as your palm of your hand. Unbelievable. Then this elderly person asked us if we believed in shaitan, or the devil. I said yes. My uncle said no. He then proceeded. About 2 months ago I was herding my sheep. Usually when you herd them, there are always goats in the front. They're like the leaders of the sheep. They eat better grass, drink cleaner water, etc. My uncle said, "Those are obvious things. Why are you talking about it?" He then said, "One goat was acting weird behind the sheep, never joined the other goats, and ignored any commands. Funny thing is, my dog and horse were acting as if the goat was a snake. They didn't come near it, they tried to avoid it. So I got off my horse, looked closer at the goat, and realized this goat wasn't from my herd." "What the hell?" I said. Tried to find any labels on it. And amazingly, this goat was white as snow and without any labels. Usually, sheep and goats have labels on their ears, like earrings. But when I tried to look even closer, it bit me. After that, I got angry and kicked it and almost lost consciousness. Everything was blurry, but I swear to God, I saw the goat get up, shake itself off, and walk away on 2 legs. Nobody believed me. It's kind of difficult for me to look after goats, but especially now, I'm afraid of them. After his words, my uncle and I were shook. Like, what the fuck, why'd you tell us this story before nighttime? We didn't sleep well that night. Never came closer to the ghosts either. What do you think? Did he tell us the truth, or was he under some kind of influence? You can be under the influence and still tell the truth. Hidden third option. Here is a very simple way to banish a very specific and silly demon. So I just got reminded of a story my grandma told me when I was a teenager. I thought I should probably post it online for its preservation. In my hometown, situated in Iran, folklore there exists a demonic horse. If you're traveling outside any settlement's vicinity alone during nighttime, you might see a horse, and you're going to be very inclined to ride it. It's often depicted as either black or red, but it could be any color. And once you're riding it, the haunting begins. You will not be able to get off of the horse. Your legs will be locked to its sides. Once it has got you, his legs will extend. You'll gain altitude, going up with the horse. After a while, the horse will disappear and you'll fall to your death. How to banish it? Very simple. Shout, "Bring me the saddle-working needle and salt." The demon will disappear, but hopefully you shouted this before reaching a deadly height. Now, what's the story behind the saddle-working needle salt and this horse? Well, I'm glad that you didn't ask. The first time this demon appeared, it didn't actually extend its legs. It was just a horse that you couldn't get off of. A young man traveling between two cities sees it, rides it, and gets haunted. He rides to the nearest Arg, which is a military fortress, and begs the commander for help. The commander chastises the man, saying that he deserves his fate for taking a horse that didn't belong to him, but eventually agrees to help. The soldiers at the Arg begin to try and kill the horse using their swords. They can't do any harm to it. The commander, who is now intrigued, sends for a wise man from a nearby village. At dawn, the wise man sees the horse and declares it a demon. "We must teach it lessons that it never haunts another human again," says the wise man. Asks the Arg soldiers to tie the horse down to make sure it doesn't run away. He then picks up a saddle-working needle. It's a leather-working needle. It's a very thick needle used to make saddles. He then dips it in salt. In Persian folklore, salt and silver, they have anti-demonic properties. A demon will not be wounded unless your blade has been covered in salt. The wise man then proceeds to sew the horse's cock to its leg. Poor horse. He lets go of the rider and tries to get away. But it can't because he's tied down. Oh. It struggles in anguish and pain for the duration of the operation. Wow, you guys should see my face. This demon is so traumatized by this experience that some mere mentioning of the saddle-working needle and salt causes it to disappear. The reason for the horse's leg extending away from the ground is because he doesn't want his dick to be within reach of any wise man. Okay. Next story. Weird choice, but very interesting. Moving on. I had a dream and spoke to a spirit. Over the summer I had a sleepover at a friend's house. I knew from the start that her house is haunted and had multiple spirits. My friend is a witch and often speaks to these spirits herself in a dream or in real life. She's pretty interesting, but I'd like to talk about my dream to you guys. For some reason, I couldn't sleep the entire night, but quickly fell asleep at 10 a.m. and woke up at 3:30 a.m. or p.m., sorry. In the dream, I'm at work. I work part-time at McDonald's. I went to the bathroom and I did my business, and as I flushed the toilet, I noticed this huge snake coming from a big vent. I was terrified. Not just because it was a huge snake, but because the huge snake had a rabbit's face. The snake made the face with an opened mouth to bite me, but when it looked at me, it immediately stopped. I was still scared, but I quickly became relaxed with it. Okay. It had the most softest and soothing male voice. I'd never heard the voice before either. We talked a lot. I don't know how long I was in the dream, maybe weeks, maybe months. He asked what Earth was like, what humanity was like, and for me, I knew he mustn't have been from Earth. Maybe he was just wondering. So I tried giving him the most neutral answers. I think it was within the course of weeks or so, because I remember I kept showing up to work and sometimes going to the bathroom to speak to him. No one else knew about him. One day I was in the back, like in the kitchen. I couldn't find the snake and I was wondering if he left. This woman walked through the kitchen with boxes of fries and a dolly. She looked like a regular woman, but I was freaked out because the face of the woman shifted to the face of a snake for a split second to show me it was him. I started freaking out because how would I know who else it is? I started freaking out because how would I know who else is not who they are? I didn't know he could manage to shapeshift. He didn't come back to the bathroom. A while later, I'm back at work and everything is running around, scared, and everything is unorganized. I asked around and somebody told me a coworker died on site. I became super worried because I'm worried if he killed someone. No one had any proof or what killed the coworker. I just ran from the restaurant. I kept running and it felt like something was following, but every time I looked back, I saw nobody. I ran into a neighborhood and heard an older woman talking to someone. I peeked around the corner of a house and saw an older woman talking to him, like old friends. I couldn't pick out what they were talking about, though. I woke up and told my friend, and she had done a tarot card reading of the spirit. The card said that he was jealous, and he loved me. I found that odd because if it was romantic love, then my boyfriend would show up in my dreams several times, and we held hands and kissed. So he 100% knew I had a boyfriend, and he didn't display any signs of jealousy. I think he and I made a very deep emotional connection, but I don't know what changed him to be violent or why he was speaking to that older woman. And no, he never tried telling me what to do, if that's what you're wondering when I mentioned his soft and soothing voice. Just because you have a soft and soothing voice does not mean you're manipulative. Weird experience. When I was a kid, I always had nightmares. Often slept with my brother. I don't remember how old I was, but I would guess around 5 years old. I had dreamt this dream that I still remember to this day. I had woken up in my brother's bed before everyone else. I went out into the living room and there was a woman in a floor-length pioneer dress. Her dress was all white, almost like a fog. Long-sleeved, the skirt part of the dress was puffy like she had a petticoat. She was staring out the window and I came up and started playing in her dress, wrapping myself up in the layers. I eventually went and looked up to see her face, and she was gone. I don't remember anything else after that. I don't remember waking up that morning or continuing with the day. Honestly, I really don't think much of it as I got older. Other than it was a weird dream I had that I remembered. I never told anybody about it and never saw her again. Fast forward to college years, and I come home to visit my family. I'm sitting at the kitchen table with a friend and my parents aren't home. My friend all of a sudden gets really freaked out and she said that she saw a woman walk up the staircase that leads to my parents' bedroom. Like I said before, I'm a skeptic. I thought that she was just being goofy. So I asked her what the lady looked like. She described her exactly how I remembered, to a T. Needless to say, it weirded me out. But again, I never told anyone what had happened. My family's exactly like me, and they don't believe in this sort of thing. Fast forwarding yet again to my adult years, and my husband and I are living in the same property as my parents, but we're about a mile across the pasture. My husband has a friend that's crashing on our couch. He's stayed with us a few times with zero complaints or issues. My husband and his friend had plans to wake up in the morning and put corn in the deer feeders before it got too hot. So we all woke up early. As soon as we came into the living room, the friend was already awake and told both of us that he was never staying at our house again. When we asked him why, he said he was woken up in the middle of the night with a woman in his face. She was dressed in a white pioneer woman's dress, and it was floor length. My jaw drops. A few years after that, my husband's cousin comes over to visit. They came to meet our kids. After the kids have gone to bed, we're all sitting on the couch talking. Mid-sentence, he turns toward our hallway. He says he saw a pioneer woman walking down the hallway. He describes her. And again, it's the exact same description. After that, I finally told my parents and husband about all these instances. My mom's, of course, freaked out that I have some sort of demon following me. I've never seen this woman besides the one time when I was a kid. Fast forward to now. I'm reading a book that's written over this community that we live in. The book is about the history of it, and a lot of history is told from my dad's uncles. His grandparents bought this land in the 1900s. It's been farmed by our family since then. I always knew that there were Native Americans here. That was mostly because we would find arrowheads every second rain. I also knew that one of the first settlers of our entire country lived on our property. The book describes a Native American war camp that was somewhere on the property. During the late 1800s, more settlers came to our land because of its natural and ancient, as the book describes it, lake. A woman goes to the lake to collect water for her family, and while she's there, Indians attack her and she's scalped. She's the last known scalping in our country. County. I've done more research on her, and her name is Amanda Coffer. She's buried in a cemetery near her house, but not on her property. Her family moved away after her death. I'm not sure where her death occurred because the book described the lake as bigger than it is today. Haven't found a picture of her, even if I did. I'm not sure I'd even recognize her. I never saw her face, just her dress. I have more questions than answers, really. Why is she following me? Why haven't I ever seen her again? What does she want? Anyways, I just thought I'd share my story. Not sure if I can say I'm a believer in the paranormal, but this definitely has piqued my interest. Old house. Back in 2009, my family rented a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house. It was like 2 small houses connected by a long corridor in the middle. Had a couple of stories from family and friends there. I never saw anything, neither did my cousin, who at the time, they were all 8. My brother went to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and started picking at some leftovers late at night. Then he heard footsteps behind him. He saw nothing. Thought it was me, maybe my mom. My brother's friend went inside the house to pick up something that left behind in my brother's room. He walks past the corridor and he thought he saw my cousin, who at the time was renting one of the rooms on the back half of the house. He turned on his phone flash and saw nobody there. To this day, he still talks about it. My uncle one day slept over on the couch. Said he felt like somebody was pulling on the blanket. I got up, checked to see what it was. No one was awake. Final story. My dad, who's your average blue-collar worker, loves football and beer, but never drinks too much. maybe 1 or 2 beers. The case usually lasts him about a month. He was one day painting some walls, like around evening. He said what he saw staring at him was something that he'll never forget. He saw, like, what's described as an outline of a man with a goat head and horns. He never believed in anything like that until that day. Could we have been living with the demon? After taking into account the stories shared by my family, the entity there seemed to be like a troll and just fucking with people. The goat man story from my dad sealed the deal. I was only recently told about that because my parents didn't want to scare me. The figure on the porch. I've never been into the paranormal per se. I don't think of myself as somebody easily spooked either, and I've never had any interest in ghost stories. That's why what happened to me at my grandparents' house last year still bothers me. Can't explain it. It doesn't fit into how I normally think either. Last summer I stayed at their house for a couple of weeks to help out with some yard work, just to spend some time with them. They live in a very small rural town and their house is very old. I don't know the exact history of it, but it's been in the family for a long time. It's one of those houses that creaks at night, and while I was there, it always felt kind of musty and kind of quiet. I didn't think much of it. One night at around 2 or 3 a.m., I woke up unexpectedly. I wasn't startled awake or anything, I just opened my eyes, fully awake for no apparent reason. Figured I was just restless, so I laid there trying to go back to sleep. I was in the guest room and my grandparents were sleeping in their room down the hall. The house was completely silent. Then I heard what sounded like footsteps outside the window on the front porch. It wasn't loud or frantic, but slow, steady steps like somebody pacing back and forth. The house is on a quiet street. I remember thinking it was weird that somebody would be walking around that time of night. I got up and looked out the window. No one was there. The porch was empty, lit by a street lamp. But the footsteps didn't stop. I stood there for seconds just listening. The sound seemed like it was right there, but I couldn't see anything. It was unnerving. And I convinced myself that it had to be something like the house settling, or maybe even an animal outside. Eventually, the footsteps stopped and I went back to bed. The next morning, I casually mentioned to my grandmother that I thought I heard someone walking on the porch at night. I didn't expect her to take it seriously, but she paused and looked at me for a second before saying, "You probably heard her." I asked her what she meant. She explained that over the years, several people have mentioned hearing footsteps on the porch at night. Sometimes they even see a figure standing at the far end, but no one can ever make out any details. She said it's been happening as long as she can remember, and her only explanation is that it's a spirit of somebody who used to live in the house before them. She said it kind of casually, like it wasn't even a big deal. It kind of threw me off. I've never seen my grandfather as a superstitious type, but she genuinely believed that there's something strange about those footsteps. Grandmother, sorry. She told me not to worry, but whoever it was, they didn't seem harmful, just a presence that made itself known once in a while. I didn't hear the footsteps again during the rest of my stay, but the experience has stuck with me. I still don't know what to make of it. I'm not saying I believe in ghosts, but it was real enough that I haven't been able to explain it away. My shoulder got touched as I was in my closet. I live in a house that was built in the 70s. My grandparents have had over 20 people, and most of them have died. There's been sketchy stuff that's happened here, but my grandma always brought in people who were in need. It's just who she was. I have many more stories like this, but I'll start with my most recent story. So my godmother had died this night, and her son, who I'm close with, and her daughter came over for a few drinks. plus my other buddy who lives a couple of doors down the road. I got wasted, started getting angry at the ghosts because I was having nightmares. Wasn't getting too much sleep for a couple of weeks, and I had basically had it. I started saying to them, "Who the fuck are you?" Oh, okay. I'm translating. "Who the fuck are you? Who do you think you are? You guys were drunkards who beat their wives and their children, probably participated in the gangbangs that went on this reserve." I live on a native reserve, and shit wasn't too pretty because of the residential school and just how everybody was brought up for generations due to racism. I understand that it isn't really right to say, and I shouldn't just let them be in peace. Or rather, I should just let them be in peace, which I apologized for the next day and began to pray for them. Anyways, I was fueled with so much adrenaline because I could feel them. I turned off all the lights, walked to the back room where most of the energy was coming from. Then I walked into the closet and sat down. I then said, "Is this what you want?" I then felt something lightly grab my arm, to which I thought it was a coat hanger. Pulled it away to where I felt basically nothing. Then I felt it again as it again slowly grabbed my arm. My hair stood up and my heart dropped, began pumping quickly. I got up, not in too much of a hurry, but a lump was forming in my throat as I swallowed it. I said, "So you are real," which was stupid. I knew that they were real and they didn't have to be bad ghosts because most of the people who lived here were friendly. No matter who it was or what they've done, my granny always brought them in and seen the good inside of them. I miss her dearly, and so I did what she told me to do. I asked them to kindly leave and thanked them for visiting and said I would pray for them, which I did. It's kind of amazing that she still believed in God after it was mostly forced on us as people to get rid of our traditional ways. But I believe in him too. Haven't really felt as bad of an energy or not really sleeping better. Maybe a little. It's better than staying up all night because I feel something watching over me. Now I understand not all spirits are bad. The little boy I seen when I was 5. As the title says, I was around 5 at the time. My babysitter and I had just laid down to go to sleep. I was one of those kids that needed something to fall asleep, and mine was to play with hair, as gross as it might sound to some people. I'd say it's around 10 or 11. My mom was out for the night being deadly, and of course, being the kid I was, your mom was out for the night being deadly? Sorry. What? Okay. Well, I was missing her, so it was a tough time to fall asleep. Me and S, being the babysitter, were laying down there for about 5 to 10 minutes before S had to use the washroom. We were sleeping in my mom's room, which was the master bedroom with a queen-size bed. And if you laid down, you can see pretty much inside the bathroom till the toilet. So, S swings open the door and I'm resting my eyes. All I hear her say was, "Hey, are you looking for your family?" My head shot up from my pillow. There was a kid, probably the same age as I was, standing there smiling. Not in a creepy way, in an innocent way. He was sort of glowing. Not too much, but you could tell he wasn't a normal kid. So as he smiles, he runs out of the room and laughs while we follow. We hear footsteps run down the stairs. We stand atop the stairs, both shocked and scared of what we just witnessed. I believe she called my mom, and I probably didn't sleep too well that night. I have a theory on who that kid was. Either before or after I was born, my mom had an abortion with my biological father. He would have been my only full-blood brother, and the rest of my siblings are half. But I'll always love them eternally. The reason for this abortion was because my father was a real piece of shit. I'm even lucky I came out of the womb physically healthy. He'd most likely beat her, and she was also pretty much drunk with me. Still. Now, I don't want y'all hating my mama. She did the best that she could, and we all struggled together. And hell, I'm not perfect. I could have been better, but we live and learn. As for my mental health, it's a work in progress. But I'll try to understand and love people with acceptance because it's how I was raised. I believe that was the last time I'd seen him. Honestly, it feels like he maybe found peace in the afterlife since I haven't seen him since. Before I was born. This all takes place in the 90s, all in the same house in a bigger city in Canada. That's because the father was a construction worker who was good at his job while his mother was, my mother. I believe she was a secretary. I think she was on leave because she's taking care of newborns. Here's story 1. Before I was born, my mother was married and had 3 kids. There was 2 girls. They were twins. And also the youngest, and a boy was about 3 years older than them. We'll call the twins S and M, and we'll call the boy J. Weird choices. My mother was laying down resting as the twins were newborns, while the father was at work and Jay was probably being a kid playing around. There was 2 beds in the room, one being a waterbed while the crib was somewhere along the side of them. My mom was awoken from her nap, and as she was facing away from the waterbed, while on a normal bed, she heard tap, 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 sort of like when it was like somebody's tapping on their head on the top of water. What? She yelled, "Jay, stop jumping on the bed," and had no response. She said it again, "Jay, stop jumping on the bed." Again, no response. She finally turned around and said, "Jay, if you don't..." She froze. She saw what looked like a little boy, but in spirit form. He giggled and jumped off the bed and disappeared. She had no comprehension of what she just saw. Neither would any of us. Story 2. This takes place at around 2 p.m. Father was taking Jay out for some ice skating. I'm guessing the twins were sleeping. They were newborns after all. So she's probably sitting up watching TV and hears the toys in the toy room go off. She goes and opens the door and all of the police and ambulance sirens are going off in the toy cars. She was in shock while standing there. Father just got home, so she tells him, "All the toys are going off, go check." And he does, just for him to open the door up and nothing happening. I'd feel like I'm going crazy if that happened, so can't imagine what she felt. Story 3. My mother has a cousin that grew up with, and who's related through their parents. Their parents were both sisters, my grandma and auntie, as I would call them. She lived in the basement of this house. They were all renting, and my mother tells them, "We're gonna head out." I didn't know where. G, as we're gonna call her, was chilling downstairs with her boyfriend A. They start hearing people running around upstairs, knowing full well that my mother and children all left with their father a couple of hours earlier. Story number 4. The father of these kids were laying down watching TV after a hard day's work. He was either falling asleep or was asleep, and he felt a force start to push down on his neck. He tried and tried and tried to sit up, but to no avail. Finally, it let go and he sat up in a panic, most likely waking up my mother. Now, this story takes place on the reserve, the house I still reside in till this day. Not the only one I grew up in, though. It's my grandma and grandpa's house. Story 5. Poopa Joe. My brother Jay was always a talented young man. Could have played for the Whitecaps if he had taken it serious. He was on the academy team around 10 or 11 until my mother and his father couldn't afford it. Unfortunately, he always had a passion for soccer. Or, the unfortunate part is the fact they can't afford it, not his choice. Our great-grandfather Joe got to know Jay towards the end of his life. He was sick. Jay, not knowing how serious his condition was, used to come to the hospital and show off his moves for him. He was around 3 at the time, and Poopa Joe was really proud of how good he was for his age. He would say, "That's awesome, Jay." And I'm sure Jay, being the showboat, he loved the attention. Well, fast forward a little while after Poopa Joe had to go, Jay started talking to Poopa. She asked, "Who are you talking to?" Jay said, "Poopa Joe." She shook her head, and after a couple of times asking him, told my great-grandmother, and she told them how fond her husband was of Jay. She said, if you don't tell him to go away, he's going to take Jay with him to the other side. This scared my mother, and a couple of days later, she took Jay down to the beach as they lived on the waterfront. They sat and watched the sunset. She was still pregnant and ready to pop with the twins, but still did it anyway. As she told Jay they had to go back up to the house, Jay said, "Okay, Poopa Joe, let's go." My mom said, "Where's Poopa Joe sitting?" He said, "Right there." That's on the log that they were sitting on. My mother then said, "Tell Poopa Joe that he has to leave." Jay said, "Why?" She said, "Tell him to leave or else he will take you from us." So Jay said, "Okay, Poopa Joe, my mom says that you have to leave or else you're going to take me from them." As tears ran down his face, she asked him, "Did he leave?" He said, "Yeah." They both walked up to the house. She said that they never heard of him again, thankfully. Jay went on to live as normal. Well, as normal of a life as you can with an alcoholic mother who didn't know her worth and a father who was a hard-ass. They both had terrible upbringings. I'd say residential school is really old, and they messed up a lot of things. But one thing it won't stop is our resilience. My first taste of courage, and a birth of fear thereafter. This story takes place before the 2000s. I know this for a fact because we moved and celebrated the turn of the year for 2000 in the new home. I always used this to remember things from that far back. I'm 31 years old today, so this was around 98, 99, putting me between the ages of 5 or 6. One night I woke up in my brother's room, where I would sometimes nap. I found myself with him and his friend, and they were playing a video game. I really wanted some chocolate milk, so I asked if he could get me some. I wasn't exactly afraid of the dark at the time. I was really just accustomed to my parents doing everything for me. He laughed at me and said I'm old enough to do that stuff on my own now. So I waited for a few minutes, gathering courage as I looked through his door into the hallway that led to the living room. It was dark. I didn't know how to turn on any lights, so I was preparing a plan of how to get to the living room to the kitchen, which is basically a simple turn of direction when you make it to the living room. You can then proceed straight to the kitchen after a brief corridor, where my parents' room, a door to the basement, bathroom, and closet is. So after summoning the courage to make this possible, I walk out of the bathroom and I make it to the last light to reach into the living room. From the living room I looked into the kitchen. The corridor had enough visibility that I could walk through it, so I proceeded onward to get my chocolate milk. Within that corridor, there's a small hallway which has a door to my parents' room, as I mentioned, and that bathroom and the closet. The bathroom is in between my parents' room and the closet. The closet is closest to the living room, where I just came from. My parents' room is closest to the kitchen. In the opposite direction of these rooms is the door to the basement, to give you a bit of understanding of the layout. When I made it to the corridor right at the basement door, something caught my attention to my left, which is where the bathroom and closet is. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a small girl comes out of the closet. She had a dress on, like something you would see in the 1940s. She had hair that was curly and short. She was entirely powdery white and left a trail of fog and powder as she moved. It was like looking at somebody from black and white film in reality, almost gray-like. She was also carrying a doll, perfect clarity. I watched her as she moved from her closet to where I was standing, and then she dropped her doll right in front of me and stood there. I was so incompetent of what I was looking at the time. I wasn't even afraid. My first reflex was to do what my mother told me to do if a girl dropped something. Pick it up for her. So I said out loud, "You dropped something." And then I reached down and tried to pick it up for her. She beat me to it. She then went back into the closet. I watched her as she returned. It was like looking at something that was recorded and played from a projector or a hologram. From how she got her doll to her movement, literally it looked like a projector playing a recording of a person. It was how fast that she got the doll that makes me say this. It was like I didn't exist at all to her. I just happened to be standing in the right place. Incompetent of what happened, still I went and got some milk. I was completely unfazed by what had just happened. I told my brother, yes, Gecko. I told my brother when I got back what happened, and he said, "That must be the girl, like the girl's dad." Oh, excuse me. That must be the girl Dad said that he heard crying in the attic when he first moved here. You were still a baby at the time. Good thing you didn't follow her. The attic entrance is literally above the corridor where this happened at. He then said that I've never seen her, but every now and then my closet door comes open. He pointed at his closet and then went back to the gaming. His friend stopped caring too and went back to playing. I made an intention to tell my parents first thing in the morning. When I did, all I got out of them was the same story my brother told me about the crying in the attic. It was the first time that I heard these stories. It seemed like they didn't care. Strange seeing something like that as a child and adults just not caring about it. After this happened, I started treating dark areas differently, and ultimately became afraid of the dark afterwards. Can't blame you. My haunted town. I live in Indiana. The state is riddled with curses and folklore that no one talks about. Not because they don't believe, but because we're used to it. We don't want others to live with it. The best example I have is my hometown of Kokomo. Kokomo falls between a small town and a medium city. We aren't huge, nor are we small, but corn and soybean fields are everywhere, as are Native American curses that we live with, including the one I'm about to tell you. Back when the Miami tribe of Native Americans called this land home, there was a girl. Her name lost to time and her people forbidden from speaking it. She was a bright girl with deep connections to the spirits. Even as the pale invaders moved closer to her home, she was bright and bubbly. Some say that she was destined to be the next spiritual leader of her people. Sad to say that it wasn't meant to be. On a cold full moon night in autumn, the girl vanished. Her people searched and eventually found the poor girl. She was crucified to a tree, her jaw ripped off and clear signs of being assaulted in the most vile of ways. A deep sadness filled her people, all of which disappeared only a few days later. The settlers found her village, and the homes on fire, the girl's body laid in a pile of animal bones and ash with her arms spread out, her pale, dead eyes gazing up at the stars. The people disposed of her in the Wildcat Creek, settled on her people's land. This may just sound like a made-up story, but I've seen her and I've felt her rage. I was only 14 years old. I was walking outside and I felt a shiver run down my spine. Fear that I've never experienced before rippled through me. I was walking down the street, one side lined with houses, the other with a cornfield. I stopped walking as I saw her. Walking from a yard to the street, shambling, her movements so wrong and horrifying, watching her shuffle, disgusting noises that I can't even describe coming from her. She stopped suddenly and the blood drained from me. I watched her head turn to look at me and I suddenly felt it. I knew what it was. It was her fear. The fear, anger, and horror she felt during her final moments. I felt sick and I felt terrible. I managed to turn and run away. I felt her behind me, as if no matter how fast I would run, that girl was only a foot away from me. I ran with all my might until I got home. I slammed the door, turned on all my lights, and prayed all night. I went by with my mom later that day. The corn where I saw her heading was all dying in a line through the field. The dog of the man that lived in the house I saw her coming from had died. I know she's out there, angry and hurt. I believe she's the cause and curse on this land. Her figure haunts me to this day, and I can't forget her. I can't look outside at night anymore, fearing that young Miami tribe girl will be standing there, coming to get me for escaping her back then. Unexplained ghost sighting at the Hollyburn House on Jekyll Island, Georgia. Somebody started a thread about what made you realize you were seeing some sort of intelligent entity. Got me thinking about this. I posted it as a comment there, but honestly was curious if anybody else had had any experiences at the Hollyburn House on Jekyll Island. That's in Georgia. Or at least knew of them or heard stories of people who had something similar like this happening to them there or them. This is a bit of a long one, so bear with me. When I was young, I spent the night at my best friend's house with my sister. She lived on Jekyll Island, Georgia. It's known for having turn-of-the-century mansions on it because in the early 1900s, a bunch of rich people built houses there as vacation homes. They have most of them to where you can do tours and walk through them now. There is one that's not. The adults said it was more for structural issues. But of course, everybody said it was haunted and had crazy stories, which were untrue, about a witch that lived there at one point. It was called the Hollyburn. Our friend's mom said that she would let us walk around the grounds outside the next day. The night before we went to go get food, she drove past the house. There were some weird lights on. Couldn't quite figure out what it was. Being a 12-year-old, like middle schooler, I was a jerk and made fun of my friend and sister. That's when they freaked out about it. Easy to be, some sort of coincidence, right? Next day, friend's mom drives us to the house again. My sister was all over it, and she said that she was staying in the car. My friend and I got out and started walking around. Almost immediately, I saw a figure in the window. It looks like a girl or a small woman. I also kept seeing weird flashes of light out of the corner of my eye. But I wasn't going to say anything. I just made fun of those nights before, right? My friend and I walk around the house. I keep seeing flashes of white light out of the corner of my eye. I ignore them and keep my mouth shut. When we get to the front again, my friend stops, looks at the house, then looks at me. She then says, "Do you see that little girl in the window?" Now, I'm late. Okay, I'm not the only one seeing this. We go to the car and point it out to my sister. She can see it, friends. Mom is messing with something in the front seat. Of course, we're all freaking out and telling her to look. Now, here's the part where I could tell that it was an intelligent entity. When my friend's mom went to look at it, it literally faded away and disappeared. She then looked away and it came back. We all start freaking out again and tell her to blow up, and she whips her head around and it fades away again. But she's able to at least see something that fades away, and she tells us. We have her do this a few more times, and every time she goes to look, it fades away and then comes back when she looks away. At this point, my friend's mom is like, "Well, that's our cue to go home." And we leave. Never went back. Probably should have tried to see if I could have it happen again. The only way I can think that could have possibly not been some paranormal entity was if somebody was some sort of special effects display or something and somehow was watching us and was making it fade away whenever Nan's mom went to look, and what would be very highly unlikely. It's not like it was a scheduled tour group. Nobody knew that we were going to go over there and walk around. So yeah, never found out what it was, but it's a fun story to tell every once in a while. Night terrors. For some context, I live in my father's childhood home in what used to be the center of a small town. The house being right next to the cemetery. It isn't something that I personally remember, but growing up I used to have these terrible night terrors, practically every night. My mom told me that I'd wake up and I'd be screaming bloody murder in my room. But whenever she'd go in, I'd be perfectly fine and no one was there. Now, my mother is a very religious woman, so out of frustration she yelled at my deceased grandmother that she was supposed to and needed to protect me. Later on, put holy water over each of the doors, and that was in all the house. After that, I never had a night terror again. As I got older and I was able to recollect things, I would have these strange nightmares either monthly or weekly, and it was always the same layout. They would take place in our upstairs hallway. I'd be talking to someone in front of the doorway to the stairs, and that's when an older red-haired woman would walk around the corner leading to me in my sister's room. I'm not sure if she says something or just looked at me, but I would always follow. Now, keep in mind that the lights would always be on the entire floor. However, when I would walk past my room, the light would be off. The room changed in my dreams with how I'd change it physically. There would always be this darker than black figure on the other side of my bed just staring at me, watching my every move. After seeing the figure, I'd eventually make my way to the original person I was with, and that's when everything would go wrong. Majority of the time, the original person I was with would get hurt in some way. The main one I remember is the person getting shoved down the stairs. Eventually, I stopped having these dreams at around the age of 15. I'm 22 now, but they still haunt me, and any nightmare I've had since still involves the second floor. I don't know if this is the thing that gave me night terrors as a kid, letting me know it was still around, watching me, or if it was something else. However, I know of other people in the area who've had similar dreams and family members that have seen physical apparitions on the property. Even a medium who's investigating the cemetery next door had said something evil was on the property. There's so much more I can do on this, but for now, if anybody has any ideas or similar experiences, please let me know. Ghost semi-truck sighting in a small town in Mexico. So for context, this happened quite a while ago in a small town in a very rural part of Mexico. Personally, I do not live in the small town, but another town a couple miles away. This town is fairly small, as mentioned, and really only exists because of a big tile factory that was built in the town. This place is also known as a rest stop for many semi-trucks passing through the lonely interstate. So the story goes that years ago a trucker passed the town and decided to stop by and rest in one of the areas. Over time, locals began to recognize that's the wrong inflections. Over time, locals began to recognize the black semi-truck stopping by every week. And on one occasion, while the semi-truck was making its way to the rest area, a truck going full speed hit the semi on the driver's side. Locals in that area called the police, but it being a rural place, it took a long time for the aid to come to the scene. According to the locals, the collision was so hard that the truck was basically embedded into the semi-driver's side. Also, the cause of the accident was most likely due to drunk driving. Nobody in the accident survived. Following a week after the gruesome accident, people in the town began to report sightings of a black semi-truck roaming the streets of the town late at night. People in town were shocked because it looked exactly like the one that was completely totaled a week prior. Locals who have seen the semi-truck being reported followed by it, being occasionally spooked by its loud horn. Once they arrive to their destination, the semi just idles for a few minutes outside of where they are. That's before they sped off into the dark. Now for my encounter. It was late at night, 2 a.m. Me and my cousin had just left a party a few towns over. Following the drive back home, we decided to take a shortcut through this town. We figured it would be a quick pastime, and at the time we knew about what had happened in the town. While driving, my cousin had to shit badly, so we stopped at a lonely gas station just down the corner. I stayed in the car while he went inside to do his business. Well, while I was waiting for him, a black semi pulls over to the side of the road next to the gas station. I didn't think much of it because they pass regularly here. They get gas and whatnot. But today was weird, because it was quiet and we were the only ones there. After a few minutes, I started to get worried because it was just idling and nobody came out of the truck. I also remembered the story of what happened here. Anxious, I texted my cousin to hurry up. And 30 seconds later, he got out and just yelled at him to get in the car. Sped out of the lot, and to my horror, the semi followed behind. My cousin, clueless, asked me what was going on, and I told him about the semi trailing behind us. I tried losing it by turning into smaller streets, but the truck was still tailing me. It wasn't until I floored it and took a sharp right, almost hitting a parked car, that I lost the semi. After that, I never passed that town before dark. Sweet dreams.